Oxford from the inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth.
Hey guys, welcome to Oxford from the Inside, the good, the bad, but always the truth. Today we're here with Bethany. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hi, my name is Beth. I crazily have finished my undergrad at Oxford doing theology and religion. And I have come back again this year to do a master's in theology. And I was at Keble College.
Nice. And today we're going to be talking about studying theology and religion at Oxford. Beth, do you want to start us off with, for those of us who don't know, what is theology?
Yeah, it's a really big question. So I guess the place to start with is that theology, the root word for theology is theos, from the Greek, which literally means God. So the technical meaning of theology is the study of God. And traditionally, how that has kind of come about in the West has been through people in the church who have wanted to ask kind of these deeper questions about God, about salvation, all these, the deeper questions basically, through three main kind of ways. So through philosophy, through a study, I suppose, of the history of the church, or religious history, I guess, and then the study of scripture, or for Christians, the Bible. And a word which theologians use a lot is exegesis, which just means the interpretation or the explanation of a text, particularly scripture. So that's what theology has traditionally been. It's been quite rooted in Christianity. However, what theology today means, particularly over the last kind of 60 years, as there's been a lot of change in the academy, is that it's hugely broadened out. And actually in I think it was 2016, Oxford changed its department from the Department of Theology to Theology and Religion. And actually, I remember in one of my interviews, I was asked the question of, why do you think it has been changed? Like, what was the reason? So I'm getting a little bit of Oxford interview flashback now. But basically what it means is that you still have those three core, I guess, roots of biblical studies, history, and philosophy, but it is so interdisciplinary now. You look at both different religions as well, so it's not just Christianity, it is looking at the world faiths, but also religion itself as a phenomenon. How do we define it, which is a very, very difficult question. But yeah, so looking at also the religions themselves, but also literature, art, poetry. It involves lots of different disciplines like sociology, anthropology, psychology, all of these different disciplines combining effectively to answer, I guess how I would put it, the big questions about God, about life, afterlife, soul, all those sorts of things. And I think theology is using all the tools that humanity has developed for the last, however many millennia to answer those questions. So that's a very long-winded answer to a very easy question. But yeah, hugely diverse and really exciting subject.
Nice. That was really interesting. One thing I wanted to ask was, within the course, undergrad course, do you look into any religions that aren't very prevalent in present day, so such as paganism? And yeah,
really good question. I mean, it totally depends what you want to do. There's a lot of self-direction, I think, in the course.
The undergraduate course.
Undergrad, yeah. If you want, I can go through what you do in each year.
Yeah, we can go into that afterwards, but yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, I mean, as for whether you can, I guess it isn't. You wouldn't typically get kind of a course on, paganism or. I'm trying to think. There, I mean, there'll probably be more. There'd be part of other courses. So, for instance, if you were really working in, medieval England and you wanted to look at kind of pre, invasions and things, then you could, there would be parts of it. But yeah, I don't think there's, Oxford is still a little bit, I don't know, catching up in a few ways. The fact that it was only in 2016 that it changed from a theology degree to a theology and religion degree shows that they're still very much exploring kind of what people want to study and different options. But yeah, there is scope for it, but it's not necessarily core syllabus first year stuff.
Nice. And I think that highlights a really, really important point for viewers watching, that Oxbridge isn't just this place that is better than all unis at all. It is another uni that has a specific type of course, and if that course isn't what you want, then it might not be the course for you, as it's not what you want, in a pedantic way of going about it. But I think it's very true. I know, with some other unis, how they structure their courses is entirely different, and if that's more suited for you, then it's more suited for you. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, a big difference when it comes to theology, I guess, is that a lot of unis, the majority of unis, will have religious studies department, and that's their degree, which is typically, so I mean, I'll talk a bit about what you do in first year, but you start kind of from the breadth. You're looking at all of history, kind of all the religions, not just the main kind of top 6 we've got today, but all the different a huge variety there. And then you maybe will whittle down and go into like one specific area, whereas I think Oxford definitely, with theology, because it comes from a Christian and a very Western academic place, that's where you kind of start, and then you branch out from there. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Also wants to ask, so you said that theology, like the study of God, and how one of the ways you can entertain or go about that is from philosophy. Just for those viewers who are trying to decide whether to apply for philosophy and theology, how do they differ then? If straight theology and religion, it sounds like you also have a philosophical element to that. So yeah, for those who are trying to decide between the two, how do they differ?
Yeah, I really struggled with this, trying to pick what I wanted to do. And I'm very glad I went with theology. I think philosophy itself has developed as its own independent discipline to theology. I think that the two, are very entwined historically. And as in philosophy, you are going to be probably at some point looking at figures like Aquinas or, church figures, because they have contributed to philosophy, to logic. But I think it is a separate discipline, with almost in some ways mathematical, with logic, which I don't know if you've done much of that. That is beyond me. But I think look at try, and if you can find lectures of different philosophy, a pure philosophy lecture versus a theology one, I think that would help, because you can do philosophy of religion, but that is very different to I guess the kind of ultimate extreme pure philosophy would be questions like, do I exist? How do I know I exist? If the sun comes up today, how do I know it's going to come up tomorrow? And the very kind of rigorous way of expressing and communicating reason and logic, which I knew as I started to dip into that, I thought, yeah, no way, this is not for me. But for people who really get into that, it's well worth looking at doing a philosophy course.
So would it be right in me saying that it sounds like, so in theology, there's a lot of there's part of it is very much of like a philosophical way of approaching things. But if someone really wants to do, philosophy and theology, sorry, the joint honours degree is encompassing that idea of theology, but also there's other parts of philosophy that are some parts nothing to do with theology, so like logic, and I guess imagine the other parts of philosophy that those thinkers weren't talking about religion at all that you could also do. Is that accurate?
No, that's completely accurate, and I think like they do complement each other really well, because theology by its very nature is very much in the world of religious thinking and thought, and you do not have to have any of that to be doing philosophy, but equally they do relate in really interesting ways. But yeah, you can in a theology degree, you don't, I think in terms of the way the courses map out, I don't think you would, if you're doing just a theology and religion degree, I don't think you would typically you wouldn't then go and take all of your courses from a philosophy list of modules. Even though there would be some overlap, you wouldn't have the same, there wouldn't be the same opportunity to do philosophy modules in that way. So if you do want to go down that route, do the joint honours, don't just do theology and religion. But you could dip your toe in a little bit if you're just doing theology.
Yeah, I think that's something that's common that I've heard with a lot of the humanities degrees, that even though some, like, I know ancient modern history overlaps a lot with history, that the degrees, how they differ is that when you choose your modules to study, there's a certain minimum requirement that's different between each subject. So I guess, as you were saying, with philosophy and theology and straight theology, when it comes down to it, there'll be a different scope of how many modules of each one you can do, and that will be very different. And if you want to do more philosophy, do the joint honours.
Yeah,
nice.
Definitely.
So talking about modules, what options are there open to you in first and second, third year, and how does it all work?
How does it work? So it's fairly straightforward for theology and religion, just the single honours. So in your first year, there are 4 modules that you take, and that you are assessed on at the end in your prelims or your final first year examinations. And the 4 modules are Introduction to the Bible. It does what it says on the tin. You spend half your time in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, and then you spend half your time in the New Testament, and you just get to learn a bit about biblical scholarship. And the second module is the figure of Jesus through the centuries, which is a bit more out there. It's basically you study Jesus, how Jesus has been portrayed, presented, interpreted through for the last 2,000 years. So this is a hugely broad course. It's sort of parachuting into different periods of history for a week and then going somewhere else. So you look at him in the Reformation, in like the early church and the creeds, but also we did literature, we did art, we did poetry. My final essay was on a film, a Martin Scorsese film. So yeah, hugely it was a really fun one.
Not The Wolf of Wall Street, I'm assuming. Not
The Wolf of Wall Street. No, it was a very weird film called The Last Temptation of Christ, which is about 3 hours long. It's wild. Not recommending it necessarily, but it was a fun one to write an essay on. So yeah, you do that paper. The third one is Religion and Religions, which is basically broadening out away from Christianity, so looking at different religions. and then also the very question of what is religion, how do we define it, and looking at different approaches like anthropological, philosophical, sociological, feminist, all these different approaches to it. And then the fourth one is the big one that most people ask about. You study a language for the whole year. And it is a language that is related to a religious text, and you get to pick which one you want to do. So you can choose between Hebrew, New Testament Greek, Vulgate Latin, Quranic Arabic, Sanskrit, and Pali. And so you spend the entire year being taught, and you effectively go from zero knowledge. Well, for me, it was going from zero knowledge to about kind of an A-level-esque standard of reading, right? Mainly reading and translation. You don't tend to speak them that much. But yes, that's first year. That's just 1 year. So you get all of that. And then second and third year, it completely opens up. You have 7 modules that you pick that you'll study over the 2 years. And then there are no requirements on ones that you have to take. There's no requirement. And then you do one thesis or dissertation at the end, which is a 12,000 word essay on literally whatever you want, as long as it is related to a theological subject of study. And so, yeah, you have kind of total freedom to curate your degree. No two people doing theology and religion will be doing the same thing. You can do absolutely nothing. You can have nothing to do with Christianity after the end of your first year if you want to in your studies. I do know people who have just been like, nope, I'm going to do second year all on Hinduism, Buddhism, and then we're going to do feminism and other things, and that's just what they do. So yeah, it's really broad, and really, I think that's really exciting as well, that you get so much freedom.
No, it does sound really, really interesting, especially how it's progressed from theology, and now people are open to do literally anything. Would you be able to tell us which seven topics that you chose?
Oh, test my memory. So in second year, I did. So I focused quite a bit on Christianity, because one of the reasons why I wanted to do theology as opposed to doing a kind of religious studies degree was because I wanted to really go in deep and kind of get quite specialized in my knowledge of that subject. So I did 2 biblical papers. I did one on the poetry of the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, which was really fun. I did a paper on the Gospels, a paper on Paul's letters in the New Testament. I did a paper on the history of the early church, so I got to do some historical stuff. A paper on systematic theology, which is effectively what people think you're doing if you're doing a theology degree. It's you go through the questions like, how do you know God exists? How does original sin work? If Jesus is required to save people, what happens to everybody else? Like all of those kind of questions. So that was systematic theology. Then I did feminist thought, and I can't remember the specific title, but it was basically feminism and religion, and we looked at all the different religions within that. And finally, I did a specialized paper on Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a German priest, who was born just before the start of World War One. And the thing that he is most well known for is his involvement in a plot to assassinate Hitler. And he was arrested and executed by the Nazi Party a month before the war ended in 1945. Yeah. And so I've got to do a huge range of stuff, basically. And it's been really good.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Sounds really interesting. One thing I wanted to ask was, I from my knowledge of, let's say, taking the Quran, that's to be described and very much believed by at least Muslims, that that is the word of God. So then when you're studying scriptures, how are, in Oxford at least, as how are students encouraged to analyze these scriptures? Are they like, how do you, sure, because in my opinion, well, from my perspective, there seems to be a struggle between studying something that is described as law but also can be seen as literature, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, what a good question. How to answer this? I think so. Oxford is not the theology faculty is not it's not like going to a Bible college, for instance, even though a lot of time is given to study of the Bible. And so you get a huge amount of opinion and I guess a very mixed approach. So you'll have people of all faiths and many of no faith. And I think it's really interesting actually meeting scholars who have dedicated their whole lives to studying a text that they personally don't believe in. And so there's a huge mix. And so from my perspective as a Christian coming in, I was quite worried at the start because I'd heard like some horror stories of if you go to like a very secular university studying religious texts, it's just going to be really, really atheist. And it's just, you're going to be laughed out the room if you say that you're a Christian or if you're a Muslim or whatever, that it's going to be really tough. And while I have found studying it from a purely academic perspective rather than a faith perspective, it is challenging, and there are definitely a couple of people who will very openly disagree with you. It hasn't been a really hostile environment at all, because I think it is this sense of the whole point is that it's about debate and it's about having different perspectives, and it's actually, studying these texts, they are enriched by people from different perspectives. The rise of like feminist thought or disability thought, for instance, that's quite a new one, which is, sorry, I'm going to go off on a tangent, but reading about Jesus healing, for instance, Jesus healing people of blindness, how are blind people meant to engage with that? And like that is a question which is one which has been raised in the last kind of 60 years properly in the academy. So is a real mix of approaching these texts, I think. So this is something I wanted to say, actually, the diversity in both the tutors, but also in the people studying it, because it in the past, it really was that if you did theology, you were doing it because you were going to get ordained and join the Church of England. And that is really not the case anymore. There are a lot of people who are Christian who do it, but from lots of different denominations, which is really good. But there are a huge proportion of students in my cohort who were not religious or were from different religious backgrounds, which there's a huge amount of diversity, and you learn a lot from just the kind of questions that other people ask as well. So yeah, that's a long ramble on that, but a lot of diversity basically.